let's talk about poles. Now, poles originally come from when talking about the globe. You had the longitude lines that ran up and down, and you had the latitude lines that ran left and right. Now, these longitude and latitude lines were used for navigational purposes originally. And these longitude lines, especially when they ran all the way to the top of the sphere or the top of the globe, they met at the North and South Pole. So we borrow this term from this definition, and we use it in a slightly different sense. Now, when we talk about poles in a 3D sense, what we really mean is any single point that has more than 4 edges radiating out from it. So, for example, when you have a point like this that has 1, 2, 3, 4 edges coming from it, that's not considered a pole. If you have, again, a point that has more than 4 edges radiating out from it, it's considered a pole. Also, one thing to keep in mind is a pole is also defined as, especially in 3D terms, a point that has less than 4 edges coming from it as well. So anything that's not ideal is technically a pole, or at least that's what we name it. So why do we talk about poles? Well, the reason why we talk about poles, or the reason why we have to, is because poles create issues with subdivision surface models. What I mean by this is that this sphere right now is subdivided using the Catmull-Clark subdivision model, and if I turn off the wireframe, or rather if I inspect this model right now, we don't really see much of an issue. It looks perfectly spherical, right? However, if I turn off my wireframe and I look at the top or North Pole, I start noticing this star-like shape thing going on here. Now, why is that? Well, it's mostly because of the fact that the poles are not solved perfectly using the Catmull-Clark subdivision method. It's just something that happens. Now, where does it happen, and how can we fix it? Well, if we were to, for example, select all these edges here and convert that selection into vertices, just for reference purposes, we have a single point that is radiating many, many edges outwards from it. So this is the pole area of the model. You know what, let me just select all this and convert my selection. Actually, you know what? I guess I really should stick to points. Okay, so if I look at this area, you'll notice that the entire pole, or all this artifacting, this radiating star that I see here, is entirely encapsulated by this pole geometry. If I was to add another edge in here, if I was to split those edges, you'll now notice that the star is getting a slightly smaller. Let me do that again. If you notice that if I bring those edges closer and closer together, you'll notice that the star gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it really isn't much of an issue. However, if I zoom out from my model, you'll now notice that there is, in fact, a pinch being made by these new edges. So, in order for me to fix that, what I have to do is I have to very simply reshape my model. So I might have to move these edges upwards, I might have to move these edges downwards, and so on until I have a much more perfect spherical shape. And until, of course, this problem goes away, because right now it's still there. So let me select that single point, move it down like that, and let's hope that for the most part the problem has gone away. And it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. So let us look at a more practical case. So let's look at when poles are actually an issue and when they're not. Now, if I look at this object, if I turn off the wireframe, just like we did last time, and I inspect this model, right now it's just a simple square. It's actually impossible to have a pole here. So let's add some geometry. I'm going to select this polygon, or rather I have to go into polygon selection mode first, select the polygon, and then I'm going to go to Mesh Edit. I will go to Subdivide, Faceted, and I will continue doing that until I have a little bit more geometry. So we have a very even surface with very evenly distributed quads all the way across the entire model. If I turn off the wireframe and I look at the specular highlight, that shiny part, and I tumble my view around, you'll notice that it looks very nice and smooth. But that's because the geometry is very even. If I, however, add some more geometry to this, so let me, for example, go to edge, and I'm going to select something like that, deselect some of these edges, like so. And I'm going to continue adding more edges. Okay, to give me something like this. Now I have a single pole here, or rather, let me go to the point mode. Okay, so I have a single pole here, I have another one here, and another one here. If I once again turn off my wireframe and I look at my object, and I look at these shiny specular highlights traveling across the object, you'll now notice that once again, the model is perfectly fine. There is no artifacting. Now, I haven't subdivided my object yet, so let me just do that now. Now I have subdivided the model. As you can see, the edges are now a lot more curvy. Let me once again turn off my wireframe. Let me look at the highlight, and it still is perfectly fine. So clearly, it's not an issue on very flat surfaces. So whenever you're creating any objects that are hard surface, you really shouldn't have that much of an issue. Now let me do something else where now I'm going to turn this into a curved surface, the same model. So I will now go into, well, I'm going to go into polygon select. I'm going to select this entire object, or not. I mean, either way, all the polygons have to be in a select all polygons mode. So if I go into bend, click at the bottom and bend the model, and press Q to drop selection, and go back into a perspective view, it still doesn't look like there's much of an issue. But now I'm going to once again turn off the wireframe mode, and I'm going to inspect my model slightly closer. Upon first inspection, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a weird thing happening here, another one here, and another one here. If I turn on my wireframe, that is in fact where all the poles are situated at. If I were to add more geometry to this single pole, like I had done previously with my sphere, so let me just keep adding more geometry. And now I turn off the wireframe. You'll now notice that I have 1, 2, 3 artifacts. I have another one here, and I still have these two. So again, once you have more edges coming to a single point on a curved surface, your problem is going to be much more pronounced. So the way we fix this is, if we think about objects and features on an object, you have to think about where you can hide this detail, because there really is no way for me to fix this on this single shape. There's absolutely nothing I could do to fix this. I could try to, for example, run a new set of edges to try to turn it all into quads, but no matter what happens, you will never ever have a perfect solved shape anywhere where you have a pole. So the only real way to fix this is to turn it into quads. So for example, this triangle here, if I took this one edge in this area and I deleted this edge, and then I ran a new series of edges down the model and connected this up to turn it all into quads, that one pole, that artifact will disappear. But before I show you exactly what happens, let me get rid of a few more of these poles. Okay, so now as you can see, we have all quads in this section. If I turn off my wireframe and I have my highlights travel across it, you'll notice that everything is nice and smooth all the way up onto this area where we still have the artifact. So let me once again run these edges downwards. Let me delete that. And in fact, I'm actually going to delete this all together. So now once again you have a object that is entirely quads. If I turn off the wireframe, you'll now notice that we do not have any kind of artifact anywhere on this object. So let me show you a more practical use for all this, or example, the head. So to finish off this chapter, I will not go into, for example, how to move these poles and whatnot. It's a little bit more work involved, and it would really make this chapter a lot longer. So let me very quickly point out what you want to do on characters like this. Well, first of all, you'll notice that there's a gigantic pole over here. There's another one here. There's also one here. Again, poles are also defined as points that have less than 4 edges radiating out from it. So you have 1, 2, 3. You have another one here, another one here. You have another one here. Now, this is actually very acceptable, and the reason is because it is all these poles are on the side of the head where most of the attention is not at. So the majority of the attention, whenever you see a movie or anything like that, whenever you see a person's head, you'll focus mostly on the center of the face, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and so on. So you want to make sure that these areas that have a lot of movement and a lot of deformation on them, those areas have to be all quad. Because if you have any kind of pinching, if you have any kind of weirdness happening in those areas, you will very, very quickly notice them. So for the most part, try to tuck your poles away from where they will mostly be seen. At the same time, what you'll notice is that we have some gigantic poles here. Again, it's not an issue because a lot of these poles will be hidden by hair. If you have, of course, a bold character and that character might not have any hair, well, then it might become an issue, and you might actually want to run these edges, these quads, completely across the entire head. It's going to be more geometry, but quite frankly, you might just need to do that. There are a few questionable poles in here, for example, this one. But again, this area is an area that doesn't really get as much movement as, for example, the lower eyelid, or the top of the eye where you have this saggy skin, or the nose flaring, or even the mouth moving. So as long as you don't have any major poles in some of these areas, it really shouldn't be much of an issue. The only one that I really could have moved out of the way is this one here, the one across the inner eyebrow. And of course the reason being is that if I ever have any kind of folds, any kind of, especially when a character's frowning or sneering or anything like that, when he's doing those kind of facial expressions, you might run into an issue. Maybe not inside Modo, but if you ever end up sculpting some of those shapes within Modo, or rather ZBrush or Mudbox, you might have a problem in this one specifically. Anyways, this is kind of a bigger topic that we can touch upon in a future volume, but for the most part I just wanted to point out exactly where it is acceptable to have these poles, and where you might want to tuck them or move them away to. Again, areas that you don't really see much deformation in, if you can control the shape and not have much artifacting going on, then that is ideal. So for example, the back of the ear, the top of the head, anywhere where you have hair is really, really ideal. So that's it for the pole chapter. Cheers.